Hyperlight Drifter is an action-adventure RPG that's basically The Legend of Zelda, except Link is going through a Vaporwave phase, has started listening to fat beatsies, and uses a gun. He's also come down with a bad case of space malaria, which results in him occasionally hacking up his lungs as if he's an 80-year-old chain smoker. The whole thing starts off with you tripping big time, having visions from God Dog about some giga-sized baddies that results in a PTSD episode, up until you get rescued by some bloke in armor and wake up inside of his house. After promptly wrecking his place, you're all set to head off and track down the MacGuffins necessary to fight the big monster from your dreams. The story beyond that is a bit sparse, with the locals in town not able to tell you jack, and what few strangers you do meet in your adventures speak to you through images rather than words. That aside, there's enough present to give some intrigue, and it's pretty cool when you piece together bits and pieces of what's going on with what clues you do find scattered throughout the world. Granted, there's a few tablets with bits of lore to them, but it requires doing actual cryptography, or a quick visit over to the wiki page to figure out what they even say. The whole driving force is basically progressing through the 4 branching paths from town and collecting enough modules to open the way to the big nasty boss waiting at the end of each dungeon. By pixel art standards, the presentation is actually pretty good, being clear to read while keeping a consistent slick-looking visual style. It's also varied and interesting in its designs when it comes to the townspeople, who most of which consist of goddamn furries. Like this rat girl with a bow, who's shown being rescued by the same guy that saved your mute ass at the start of the game. When it comes to the enemies, there's these little green orc gobbler looking goons, samurai ninja toads doing backflips and spamming shurikens, flavors of cat dude with gun, and other cat dudes that'll dash behind you like it's nothing personnel. There's even bird shamans that dress up like they're gangsters ready to throw down in a rat battle. And the bosses themselves have some pretty memorable designs too, like this hoity git being cheered on by all of his bird boys. And that's to say nothing of the scenery, which can be downright beautiful at times. The game handles well for the most part, whether with a controller or using a mouse and keyboard. However, dashing towards your cursor instead of basing your movement when using the latter can be a bit disorientating and takes some getting used to. It could even make some of the trickier platforming puzzles more difficult, since you're battling the position of your character with your cursor while having to rapidly dash about all over the place. On rare occasions, it'll just ignore an input command, so sometimes I'll just stand around like a bellend instead of finishing a 3-hit combo or dodging out of the way. The combat is pretty fluid and has a sort of rhythm to it, requiring patience to avoid attacks while searching for opportunities to counter hordes of enemies looking to slam your booty. The upgrade you get to dash near infinitely requires some precise timing to maintain, else you'll just stutter and stop, although it feels pretty satisfying once you get it down right and speed your way through a level or out of danger. Given just how sensitive moving around using the analog stick is, it can be a bit finicky when trying to be accurate and result in narrowly missing ledges during platforming, or more likely than not end up face planting against just about everything. It's no wonder they give you such a sweet ass helmet given how frequently you'll end up crashing into walls. The action is pretty lethal, with it not being shy when it comes to throwing screenfuls of enemies at you all at the same time. And with such a brief window of invulnerability whenever you get hit, being knocked down is ultra punishing, pretty much guaranteeing death against bosses and the particularly nastier mobs. This serves to emphasize mobility and proper positioning during combat by constantly moving, while rewarding you for being aggressive by recharging your gun whenever you strike something in melee. So feel free to be liberal with your ammunition and not be a stingy git that's letting a valid ranged option go to waste, especially when it's so satisfying to dish out a 3-hit combo before mag dumping your pistol into some salt's cranium. Most hitboxes are super tight, although there's a few exceptions where they're a little too large or unclear in some cases, like walls that can straight up eat your attacks and cause you to miss something that's right in front of you just because you're standing in their fake vicinity. Damage also seems to be dealt as soon as an attack starts, rather than making contact with your model, so you have to steer clear before they finish the wind-up lest you beef it. These are all pretty minor gripes though, that don't detract too much from the combat itself, which otherwise flows very well, and feels really rewarding when you take out a room full of dudes without suffering any damage. Managing your health and stamina is as important as ever, having special attacks that'll drain it alongside your dash, so you have to balance between dedicating to some fancy moves to dish out large amounts of damage, while keeping some in reserve to dodge out of danger. Although this leads in with the small inconvenience of being able to pick up health items or even heal yourself when you're already at full, so that's a bit annoying. On the plus side, it will recover your health if you're already at the maximum amount of pickups, so there is that at least. The penalty to death isn't too severe, thankfully, simply tossing you back to the latest checkpoint, which is typically the start of an area, or whenever you last interacted with a particularly important looking object. Some levels can be somewhat long though, so the amount of pain inflicted can greatly vary, like this forest area being pretty unforgiving when you mess up and have to clear the whole area all over again. Fortunately, stuff tends to stay dead in an area for quite a while, seeming to only respawn along with health items when you come back to them later on. So you can always make a quick detour down an elevator and come back to update your progress and give yourself less things to clear up at a time. Plus, you're now armed with the knowledge of what to expect, like enemy placements, ambushes and so on, so it strikes a good balance between forgiving and challenging. It's also very merciful when it comes to boss rooms, usually dumping you right outside so you don't have to suffer the tedium of spending minutes running back there just to retry what tripped you up the first time. It does seem a tad inconsistent though, as it tossed me back further than it should have at least once or twice. My only major complaint with the system of tracking progress is when you have to collect all the items you got the first time around, which gets a bit frustrating whenever you pick up enough gear bits to currency used to purchase upgrades, since it plays a brief animation of them being formed and being put into your inventory. That's all well and good until you watch the same thing for the 5th time in a row as you retry the more difficult areas. Also, having to rearrange which guns you have equipped gets a bit annoying, since you can only have 2 at once and it doesn't update between tries until you reach a new save point. The choice of upgrades aren't too numerous, but they feel like substantial improvements, such as being able to dash through projectiles without getting hit, making your attacks deflect them back at enemies, the near essential chain dash, grenades to help deal with a vast number of monsters coming at you at the same time, and the power attack for when you really need to chunk a dude. Plus, there's a variety of different weapons you can collect and use to your advantage, which can fit different situations, or some can be used to access previously locked off areas. It also has a co-op mode, which thanks to Steam's remote play, means you can invite a friend to join you in the fun or back you up in some of the harder sections of the game. Or, more likely in my case, have them help out by constantly pushing you off of ledges and into oncoming hazards. Yeah, okay guy, thanks Mio. Besides that, it runs surprisingly well, with pretty much no latency to the input. However, it does feel like it has some mouse acceleration or something when moving the cursor around. Otherwise, it handles pretty much like normal, but on the downside, you share the same loadout, so you can't have separate guns equipped besides what the host decides. It can also be a bit inconsistent, with the second player sometimes disappearing during set pieces, and not always respawning them like it should do between areas. Outside of bosses, it can make the game fairly easy since there's now 2 of you running around, with you both having 5 pips of health and only taking 1 away from the host whenever the second player respawns. You effectively get a 5 health tank to soak up damage for you. Otherwise, it at least doubles the health of bosses, so it stays somewhat difficult in that regard, and health is reduced to a maximum of 2 on New Game Plus, so it remains somewhat challenging even with the extra health. Level design is fairly good, not being spectacular, but enough to know there was some effort put into the flow of each zone. From the start, you've got a choice of 3 directions to go that you can tackle in any which way you want, with each offering their own unique aesthetics and level of difficulty before opening up the 4th pathway. You can always partially progress through one area to unlock a warp zone and fast travel back, explore elsewhere in search of gear bits, upgrade your equipment, then come back once you're better suited to tackle the more difficult parts. The maps themselves are somewhat varied, following the theme of which path you're going, whether it's the water temple that gives off serious episode 1 Naboo vibes, the icy roads up north, or the forests full of crystal boys. The difficulty curve remains pretty steady, with only a couple of spikes when introducing groups of new, stronger enemies now and then within locked Zelda rooms. Why you would install a dead man switch on an animated plant, I do not know. There's copious amounts of secret spots to hide the near 200 gear bits and the 16 keys needed to access certain locked rooms. Not to mention the health pickups just out of sight, make it a big incentive to wander off and explore. Thankfully, most are marked by a symbol on the floor denoting a hidden pathway to help avoid grinding your face against a wall, while some are a bit more obscure and need you to sweep along the ledges of pits in search of something to interact with, which does lead to a few instances of not being able to see what should be right in front of your character due to the top-down perspective obscuring it from sight. The rate at which you find much needed health pickups or gear bits is pretty frequent, so it feels rewarding to keep checking around all these nooks and crannies. Either way, this all ties in with the whole collectathon it's got going on, needing to grab enough of these power modules to open the way towards the final boss. Getting enough also lets you access some previously locked off areas that may contain some useful items like new outfits you can change into. As to what they actually do is left for you to figure out since it doesn't tell you. I think this one recharges grenades faster? The sound design and music is really good, which feels like the norm for these kind of indie games at this point, but still it has a pretty sweet electronic soundtrack, with a good mix between calm and soothing background pieces. Ambient sets that can be a bit unsettling, and the score accompanying the combat itself being suitably sick. Once you've finished off the main campaign, you unlock the boss rush modes in order from fully equipped to having only some upgrades, and then finally just your sword and pistol. With there being only a couple of bonus health pickups available between each fight, it could make for quite a fun challenge, and I still hate this warlord and his sword combo. You'll also unlock New Game Plus, which lets you carry on with most of your upgrades, while as mentioned, reducing your maximum health to 2. Besides that though, it doesn't seem to really change all that much. Despite the rather abstract story and its delivery, it's a very solid experience, with the gameplay being fast, fluid and fun, and the exploration and platforming being sufficient to keep you pushing forward through the whole 6 to 8 hours a first run will take. Then maybe another 3 or 4 if you intend to 100% it. I give Hyperlight Drifter a score of 8 high-impact head traumas out of 10. It's very much worth its reasonable asking price of 15 quid off Steam, and I strongly recommend you play it. As always, cheers for watching. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got to go finish my laps.